To understand my story, you sort of have to know a tiny bit about trespassing laws in our country. In that, we don't have any, so as long as you're respectful and non-destructive, you can walk over any hills you like, and in my case, camp on any beach of your choosing, so long as once you leave the area, it's how you found it. I used to love camping when I was little. Our family would go multiple times a year, with a large group of my parents' friends and their kids. On average, there were maybe 10 of us at a time, which was a bit of a logistical challenge, since we always headed out to this one really remote beach on the coast. Actually, we weren't the only ones. There were always yachts bobbing just off the shore with people in them, and other campers lining up and down the beach. Most of them also had children or teenagers, so it wasn't a wild party scene. It was very much of an informal family holiday spot. There was even a small building with toilets and showers installed nearby, even though this was the middle of nowhere. I guess the local council must have figured it out and got sick of people peeing behind bushes. We took a trip up in spring 2011. I'm really bad with time, but I know this because I got my dog in winter 2010. After picking her out that November from the shelter as a birthday gift from me to me, as I paid her adoption fee. Reddit, I know you love dogs, and she will be very important to the story later on, so let me tell you a little about Parmesan. Parmesan came to me as a 6-month-old puppy who had been rescued from a dogfighting situation. We're not entirely sure what breed she is exactly, but my best guess is Lurcher Staffy mix. She is a wonderfully well-tempered dog, with people and most dogs. But you absolutely do not threaten her. She'll have you. So, by the time of this camping trip, I had Parmesan for a few months. She'd never come camping with us before, but as far as my family are concerned, dogs go on camping trips. So we all piled into the car, and she came too. Unusually though, none of the family friends could make it. So it was only me, my sister, my dad, and my mom. I didn't mind. I wasn't that attached to the other kids. I'd rather play with my dog, and I'd still have my sister. The drive took the best part of 6 hours, and because we'd left a bit later, although I don't remember why we'd left later than normal, we arrived at sunset. Not a good time to be building a tent, but we'd expected to arrive to other campers already set up and the beach illuminated in campfires. The beach was empty. In spite of this, my parents started taking stuff out and trying to build the tent. They asked us to fetch some of the lighter bags from the boot of the car while they sat pointing a flashlight at the sand to see properly. I rolled down the window of the car for Parmesan before getting out. It was pretty hot for that time of year, and I wanted her to have air. I always got to be looking out for my furry little homie. As we're fumbling about in the dark on a beach in the middle of nowhere, it's pretty spooky. The one road that led to this beach was circular and had a bridge over the water, meaning you could basically circle around the beach like a big O shape if you felt like it. I wasn't really paying any attention to the road. I was complaining I was tired, as kids do, but my mom was. After maybe 15 minutes of my dad trying to nail the tent into the sand, my mom's asking him, had he seen that car drive around? It's been a few times. My dad kind of shrugged her off. He's sort of like that. I don't know if he said anything back to her. But after a few more minutes, a car pulled up next to ours on the road, and someone got out. It was maybe 15 or 20 feet from the cars to where we were, and the light was pretty low, except for the torches. We weren't expecting to see anyone else out here at this point, and I think my mom said it must be security. I don't know why a random beach would have security. I think what she meant was the Wildlife Trust or something, as they do occasionally come down to do their nosy. The guy was walking pretty unevenly. He must have been drunk or high, because he had that stagger to him. There was absolutely no way this guy was sober. Cool. A junkie. Not an unusual find, but it's rare to see them in the wild. As he walked into the flashlight range, we realized he was carrying a large knife, maybe 15 inches. Although I was small at the time, so maybe my sense of scale was off. I don't like my dad, but credit to him. Once he saw this, he got up immediately, holding onto the camping mallet, and put us all behind him. And the man began to shout wildly at us that we can't camp here, and he was just letting us know. My dad tried to initially be a bit low-key with the guy, and told him that was fine. We'd leave, but this didn't work. He kept coming closer to us, so my dad started shouting, and the man kept shouting back. My sister and I were crying. I remember shaking. I was utterly terrified, as I'm sure anyone would be in that situation. It really did seem like this guy and my dad were going to fight, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't fancy my dad's chances. While it's grim to consider, I'm absolutely convinced he would have killed my dad, and possibly us as well, once he was done. As I don't think my mother would have had the common sense to run with us. I love her, but she's always put Dad and her relationship with him above us. This isn't how it went down. A bolt from the black, like a wolf descending on its prey, took us all by surprise. Most of all, the man with the knife. In that moment, Parmesan was the apex predator large canines represent in nature. She got him good by the arm and clamped down hard, ripping his jacket and shredding the skin underneath. He dropped the knife, as it had been in the arm she got him by. He kicked her, he punched her, and eventually got her off. He grabbed the knife from the sand and ran back to his car and drove off. Parmesan didn't follow him. She stayed with us, muzzle covered in blood. Quickly as we could, we gathered our things and all got back in the car, all pretty shook up by the incident. I looked Parmy over. She was okay, but the car's window was much more open than I'd left it in. We think what had happened was, when the shouting started, she must have put a pause up on the gap I'd left for her, as it was an old car and had the rolly down windows, and not an electric button. We think she must have been able to hit it with her paws to force it down enough to squeeze out. This is not the end of my story. We were all pretty scared, and since we had the dog with us, we couldn't book into a hotel for the night. My parents decided to just drive home so we could all feel safe. But first, I had to drive into the nearest town for petrol, as they were kinda low, and I spent the time trying to clean Parmesan up a little. I'd always loved dogs, but what she'd just done for me blew my mind. As we drove into town, we came across a petrol station, but it looked closed. My dad drove up closer to get a better look and stuck his head out of the window to get a better look at the sign. My mom asked him what on earth he was doing, and he told her he was trying to see when it opens. Never. My heart sank. Parked in the corner, behind a van so we didn't see him at first, was the man with the knife. He was sitting on the bonnet of his car, using some tissue paper to clean up his arm. It looked pretty bad. Without stopping to refuel or look anywhere else in town, my dad drove right out of there, and he decided to go to the next town over. But this was too remote. The next town over was 60 miles away. He didn't have that much petrol. We realized, as we began driving, we were going to break down. "That's fine," Dad said. We had AA cover. They'd come tow us home, or at least somewhere acceptable for the night. Better than staying in the last town. After driving for maybe 5 minutes, lights flash us from behind. Another car. The same car the man had been driving. It was him, following us. He must have realized we were low on petrol. The next half hour was one of the worst half hours of my life. I had a complete and utter breakdown, as did everyone really. I could tell my parents were trying to keep it under wraps so it wouldn't upset us. But we weren't really little kids. We were both double digits. We knew how dangerous this situation was. Dad turned off the radio to conserve petrol, and the man followed us for 55 miles before he peeled away onto another road. Our fuel meter was on the big red E for empty for the last 10 miles. We were driving on fumes. Now, I don't really believe in God, but if he does exist, that was definitely one of his miracles. Once we got there, we drove into a petrol station and refilled to a full tank before driving the rest of the way home. My sister and I slept in the car after that. I only woke up once we made it all the way home. Just grateful nothing worse had happened than that. After getting some sleep, my mom phoned the non-emergency line for the police and reported what had happened. They never got back to her after that, but apparently, the woman she spoke to said they may wish to in the future, as he matched the description of a suspect wanted in relation to a murder charge. No idea if he actually was that guy, or just a random psycho. As I said, they never got back to her. So what's the takeaway then? Other than crazy man on the beach, let's not meet. Well, for me, it's that I love Parmesan. She's still with us now, old as the hills and twice as grizzled as one of my mom's friends likes to joke. I don't know why she did what she did that day, but I couldn't tell you what her thought process was. What I do know is that this poor puppy was born into an environment where they abused and neglected her, only to be rescued and taken shelter to where her mother and siblings all found homes before her. Despite how badly people had treated her, when I took her home, she forgave but never forgot. I think the saying is, I never trust a person who doesn't like a dog, but I always trust a dog when they don't like a person. They have a very good understanding of human body language, and I think she must have understood how much danger we were in. If you're able to, please adopt. You might find yourself in a situation like mine one day. I promise you, if you're willing to save a four-legged friend's life, they will pay you back tenfold if they're able to, without a thought for their own safety. I paid £78 for Parmesan's adoption fee, which is a lot when you're a kid, but it chills me to my bones, knowing if I hadn't been so instant on a dog, I might be dead. I was camping in the middle of nowhere in Washington, near Mount Rainier. Like, not an official campground, just way out in the forest, where I wouldn't have expected another human for miles. One night, I wake up, and hear something. I opened my tent, and there was a guy sitting by where my fire had been, right outside my tent. Nothing particularly noteworthy about the guy, just a fairly regular-looking dude, just sitting there a couple feet from my tent. No bag or pack or anything with him, just a guy. He saw me open the tent. His eyes got huge, like he had just seen a ghost, and he took off. It shook me up pretty badly, but over the next day, I managed to put it out of my mind fairly well, after writing it off as just some odd occurrence, and a guy that was probably high on something, and had somehow managed to set up camp, coincidentally not far from mine. Then 2 days after that, and 10 to 15 miles away, in totally random directions, that nobody could take the same path, as on accident, I was sitting by the fire that night, and started hearing noises that I got more and more convinced were a person. I called out to them, and out of the darkness, someone who was like, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" I said no. I don't even think that's a real place. They kept talking from just out of my line of vision. I tried to see them with my flashlight, but yelled, "Aim that way," and kind of spooked, and not wanting to piss off a potentially crazy person, I did. After like 15 minutes of me being very freaked out, and them talking and asking completely random questions, from the darkness, it sounded like that voice had gotten closer. So, I shined my light that way again, and it was the same dude who had been outside my tent 2 nights before. He had to have followed me almost 15 miles over 2 days, because there is no way he could have just accidentally wound up in the same spot. As vast as that wilderness is, no possible way. As soon as my light hit him, he took off again. I started to chase him, but didn't want to get lost in the wilderness, in the dark. So I stopped quickly, after probably only 100 to 200 feet. This one couldn't be written off, because the only way he could have been in both places is specifically if he was following me. I decided the trip was very over first thing in the morning, and hiked back out over 3 days, constantly doubling back, trying to throw anyone following off my trail, and occasionally hiding and waiting to see if he would come by following me. And I really can't describe how terrifying it was to feel like I was being hunted through the woods, and to actually have to brainstorm on things I could do to best avoid potentially being murdered. On the first night of hiking out, twice, I heard what sounded like a person walking circles outside my tent. But by the time I mustered the courage to look, nobody was there. On the second night, I heard what I thought was an animal making noises at first, in the distance, but slowly decided it sounded more like a human, making animal calls. It could have actually been an animal, as I didn't actually see the guy again. But it really sounded like a person, making howling noises. I literally almost cried when I finally got back to the car. The relief was so strong. To this day, this was probably the most terrifying experience that I've ever had. I have no idea who the guy was, or what his intentions were, and no way of getting an explanation. But I really can't articulate just what a terrifying few days it was. This happened to me a while back when I decided to go on another camping trip alone. I always liked camping alone. There's something serene and sobering about being isolated in the middle of the wilderness, and I always found it relaxing. So I planned out what trail I was going to take, packed my camping gear and my rifle for protection, and jumped in my truck. I get to this trail early in the morning and hike about 15 to 20 miles in until I find the right spot and head off the trail to find a place to put my tent up. I stumble upon this nice-sized clearing and decide that it's a nice, beautiful spot to settle down. I'm exhausted at this point, but set up the tent at the southernmost edge of the clearing, next to the tree line, and manage to get a fire going. I roast some weenies and start to hear a sound in the distance, underneath all the forest noise. It sounded like an animal, most likely a deer with a lame leg, as it sounded like the animal was making a walking, dragging noise. I felt bad for the poor guy, but it was too far away, and it was getting dark, so I couldn't really go out and find it and put it out of its misery. Thinking nothing of it after that, and go about eating my food. After I eat, I douse the fire and crawl into my tent and insert myself into my sleeping bag. I decide that, even at my exhausted and relaxed state, I can't go to sleep. So I pull out a book I brought with me and start to read by the light of my lamp. Hours go by, and I hear that sound again. This time, closer. Right at the opposite side of the clearing, towards my tent. It's really loud at this point, and it now sounds like the hooves are all being heavily planted, with the dragging noise following seconds after. Like this deer is dragging something along. It makes it to about what I assume is the middle of the clearing and stops. I hear nothing. No breathing. I mean, not a sound from this animal. I unzip the tent and look into the clearing. Nothing but trees and darkness. What the fuck? Unnerved at this point, I zip the tent back up and sit there, listening for other noises. Nothing. Just the crickets and the breeze. I decide that there are a lot of strange noises in the woods and try not to let it bother me. Besides, I had my rifle. I start to doze off when I hear men's laughter off in the distance to my right, then women's laughter, and sticks snapping far off to my left. I'm up now, wondering if what I'm hearing is really what I'm hearing, or just a product of being half asleep. I hear more faint laughing from a couple other different directions, all different, i.e., old men, old women, even children, and confirm that it's real. The noises are closing in, and I grab my rifle, preparing to fire a warning shot off in the air in case they came too close. Something about this laughter, how far in I was, the noise earlier, and the time of night, told me that this was not just another family strolling through. I was on edge enough already, but then I noticed that the nightlife was dead quiet. Not even the wind was making any noise. I decided enough was enough. I unzipped the tent and fired a shot into the night. I sat there and surveyed the tree line, saw nothing, I listened intensely to my surroundings. No laughing, and the forest sounds had returned. Relaxing just a bit, and figuring that scared whoever off, I sat down, and in my exhausted state, I fell asleep. I woke up later in a cold sweat, racked with anxiety, and it was still dark outside. I immediately hear two people whispering not too far away from my tent. Alert, I grab my rifle and listen to what they are saying. I can't make out much, but I hear something about being lost, so I shout, "Hey, who's there?" The voices fall silent. I shout again, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Suddenly, a huge burst of flame, like a flamethrower, erupted from the middle of the clearing, illuminating several silhouettes of people just standing around. In shock, I fire my rifle, blowing a hole in the front of my tent, and it goes dark. Without checking my surroundings, I get up and sprint out of my tent, making a hard left back to where the trail was. I hiked until sunrise back to my truck, with my head over my shoulder the entire way. Never heard anyone follow me, never saw anyone or anything the whole way. But I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. After that, my enjoyment of camping alone left me, like I left all my gear in the woods that night. My family has a camping timeshare, and we used to go camping for weeks at a time in the summer. My dad had to work, so he would stay home Monday to Thursday and come meet us at the campgrounds Friday to Sunday. The campgrounds had a pool, miniature golf course, basketball courts, and we'd gone for so long that my mom was comfortable letting us wander, since there was only one entrance exit. When I was around 8, but was small for my age, so I looked around 5, I met a little boy who was camping with his single dad for a few days. He came to our campsite a lot and knew we were staying for a while. I was pretty sad when he left, but his dad said they'd come back sometime soon. A few weeks later, his dad came to the campsite right after my mom left to take a shower. He told me his son was coming later that week. He asked where my parents were, and I told him my dad doesn't come until Friday, and my mom always takes a shower at this time. He said bye and left. The next day, he came by at the same time and told me that he had just found some kittens and asked if I wanted one. I said yes. He told me he kept them in his tent and I could come pick one. Now, this guy wasn't a stranger. My mom had met him when he picked up his son from our campsite. So I didn't get that creepy stranger vibe and get okay going with him. We walked towards his campsite, but then he told me he had actually moved into his truck so that they wouldn't get hot, which made sense to me. He pointed to his truck right outside the gates of the entrance. I start walking towards the entrance with the guy when my dad pulls up. He got the day off work so he could spend more time with us. He asks what's going on, and I say, Tommy's dad said he has kittens in his truck, and I can have one. My dad gets out of the car, tells me to run back to the campsite. So I do. When my dad gets back, he tells me never to go alone with an adult anywhere, even if I know them. I asked my mom years later about the whole thing, and she told me my dad kicked the crap out of him and called the cops. This happened to me when I was a teenager. I think it was the spring break of 1998, when I was 14. My Boy Scout troop went hiking in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. I grew up in a very small town in Tennessee, and the boys in my troop were people I'd known my whole life, and we were all very close, and knew each other very well, and trusted each other. We'd been hiking for 5 days or so, and it was miserable. It rained every day, and we were all exhausted and sore, and hungry, and covered with blisters. The adults realized we'd bitten off more than we could chew in trying to hike a 60-mile trail, especially with the awful weather. So we changed course and gotten off the trail to spend the night in a drive-in campground. The kind of place with hookups for RVs and picnic tables, and fire pits and grills, and a central bathhouse with showers and toilets. It was in a very remote area, far from a town or a house. There may have been a few other small groups there, but if there were, we never interacted with or saw any of them. We were all filthy and wet, and thus very excited about taking a hot shower. It was dark and we'd finished dinner. A group of 5 of my friends, including my friend Jeremy, who, like everyone else in our group, I had known since we were babies, headed up to the bathhouse, which was maybe a quarter-mile walk through the pitch-dark woods, up a worn-down gravel walking trail. I stayed behind to clean up, and after 10 or 15 minutes, followed them by myself. I had a weak little flashlight, the old incandescent kind, pre-LED. I remember the woods were totally silent. When I got about halfway to the bathhouse, I could see the light from it, off in the distance, through the woods. I heard a noise to my left, and I looked over and saw my friend Jeremy standing by an old school manual water pump about 20 feet off the trail. The kind of pump where you raise and lower a handle to pump water up from a well. There was a strange light around him, like the moon had come out from behind the clouds. I was startled to see him there, by himself, in the woods off the trail. I asked him if he was already done with his shower. He seemed kind of sad, and he said, "Yeah, it's all yours." I said okay, and didn't think much of it, until I got to the bathhouse. When I walked in the door, my friends were all in there, and I heard Jeremy talking from in the shower. All the blood drained out of my head, and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had to sit down before I passed out. My friends were freaked out and wanted to know what was wrong. I told them what had happened. They nervously made jokes about how I must have been smoking pot. This was long before any of us had experimented with any mind-altering substances. But I could tell they believed me. Like I said, we'd known each other forever, and knew when one of us was exaggerating or playing a joke. We all waited together until everyone was finished showering and brushing teeth and whatnot, and then walked back together in total silence. When we got back to the spot I'd seen, whoever, he was gone without a trace. The water pump was there though. No one had noticed it before, because it was ways off the trail, and obviously not in use. We got back to our campsite, and went to bed freaked out. I remember not sleeping much that night. In all the years since then, I've never been able to figure out what happened. Was there a random teenage boy in the woods who looked just like my friend? Unlikely. Did I hallucinate it? Also unlikely. Who's to say? This all went down during the spring break of my junior year of high school. My school was in a pretty small Iowa town, with a district spanning several smaller hamlets. During the summer of 2014, a few friends of mine put together a film club that would make short films and compete in national film festivals against other schools. We were a pretty small group, and I found it kind of difficult to get together for any actual filming until spring break of 2015, when we made plans for a little excursion. 4 of us ended up going on the trip, myself and 3 members of the club. Let's call them Jake, Bill, and Kyle. We ended up choosing to go camping out at Mossy Glen Hollow, a supposedly haunted state park up in northeastern Iowa. Since the 1850s, there have been several murders and suicides out at Mossy Glen, including a few decapitations, and a hired hitman in the 1930s. Being the edgy teens that we were, we jumped at the chance to go hiking and camping somewhere like that. It was within 15 minutes of a small town as well, so stocking up on food wouldn't be that big of an issue either. So, all lights green, we loaded up 2 of our sedans, programmed the GPS, and off we were for a spring break, camping in some haunted woods. After the first hour and a half on the road, a few red flags began to fly. After the last large town before getting way out in the boondocks, my phone's data signal cut out, and the GPS randomly changed directions on us. Since none of us have any idea where the hell we were at, or where Mossy Glen was supposed to be, we didn't have much choice but to blindly follow the new route. Once we were firmly in the middle of nowhere, our GPS took us off the paved highways and onto gravel roads. At this point, you typically would see the usual brown Iowa DNR signs designating that you were near a state park. But there were none. There weren't even any tree clumps to indicate that you were near some sort of forest. Red flag number 2. Another 10 minutes or so into the drive, and the gravel road soon turns into a dirt road, then a low-maintenance road, then a Class B minimum maintenance road. With Iowa's dedication to road preservation, this basically means that somebody probably came by and took a peek in the 90s, and then promptly forgot about its existence. As we came around the last hilly bend that the GPS shows on our route, we see a farmhouse with a large machine shed, with no lights or activity around either, and no cars in the driveway. A bit weirded out that a house would be right next to a state park, we slow down and keep rolling. To our dismay, however, the road dissolves into a mess of washed tractor tire gouges from last fall's harvest. We stop the cars as far down as we can pass without getting hung up on a frozen rut and unpack some of our equipment. The road gradually narrows, snakes down the middle of a field, and turns down into a small but very thick clump of woods at the bottom of a wide ravine. We get out and hike down the gradually steepening slope and take in the scenery. At first, everything looks like a pretty damn cool set to a film. There are several limestone outcrops hanging off the hillside, a footpath with some picturesque tree overhang, and even a few birds out that made an unseasonal return from wintering down south. We can all hear some water running, but can't identify a source from the trail. Looking off in any direction, all we could see was a seemingly endless sea of trees. And at the bottom of the hill was a small pond, in the middle of a grassy clearing with a fence. As we approached the fence, we noticed a sign: private property, keep out. Bill checks his watch and realizes that it's almost time for dinner. So we trek back to our vehicles and hook up the GPS. The nearest town over was a little place called Edgewood that had several diners and a gas station to load up on supplies for the week. We brought some canned food, but not much beyond that. As we got to town, we realized that Edgewood was a lot smaller than we'd expected. Less than 900 people, it would turn out. Everyone knows everyone in these small towns, so we got several weird looks when 4 strangers rolled up with plates from the other side of the state. Kyle thought to ask the cashier and a few people at the gas station about Mossy Glen Hollow and why the only route was through some dude's field on a busted out dirt road. To our surprise, nobody had even heard of a place called Mossy Glen, nor could they figure out why the hell 4 high schoolers suddenly rolled into town looking for the place. Red flag number 3. We shrug it off as just a few crazy locals and take back down the dirt trail. As we round the corner, back near the farmhouse, we notice that all the lights are still off and nobody seems to be home. I suggest that we leave some sort of note on the house door that we're going to be parking on the side of the road near their place, just to be safe. It is starting to get late in the day, and being this far out in the country, it wouldn't be unheard of to come face to face with a shotgun when the homeowners find our cars, since the road is impassable from that point on anyway. Parking there wouldn't realistically block anybody off the road, and would still technically be on public land. We hike back down the wooded trail and start scouting for a place to set up camp for the night. Making sure to be on the public side of the fenced pond area, we discover that the sea of trees that we saw earlier was actually quite a bit thinner when seen from below. In fact, the dirt path led to a decently sized clearing with a creek and small waterfall cutting through the limestone deposits. None of us could believe that we had missed on such a thing a few hours earlier. When Bill comes to the realization, he disappeared around the corner, back into the trees, and emerges at the top of the trail a few minutes later. Though we could plainly see him, the trees lined up just right so that he could not see anything beyond the rocks below the path ledge. Continuing further up the creek, we notice that there are conveniently placed rocks about the perfect distance apart to step without disturbing the water or surrounding rocks. One could walk almost silently up and down the creek while the sound of the water masked the steps. Not thinking much of it, we take some pictures of the large moss-covered boulders all around and get some pretty nice scenic shots. We find a place to make camp, and everything is going great until we approach the waterfall. Just before the waterfall sat a clearing without any large boulders or rocks, and an odd arrangement of logs. One sat horizontal, supported at each end by 2 piles of rocks. In front sat a crude stone circle with a pile of burnt logs inside, a fire pit, with a bench. Though a bit surprised at first, we shrug it off as some weekend project that the people up at the house put together. After all, with such a cool place, just a short walk from home, why not? I have a similar fire pit set up at home, so I'm not too concerned. "Hey, what the hell is this?" Kyle yells, from a boulder a few yards ahead. On it sat a blaze orange beanie, a single gardening glove, an empty can of beer, and a stick of deodorant that had seen some serious wear. Looking closer at the beer can, we realized that it must have been opened fairly recently. Foam is still fresh in the bottom of the can, and it still had a fumey smell. Bewildered by what the hell we just found, Jake starts looking around the other side of the boulders, upstream of the items. "Holy shit, there's a cave over here," he shouts back to us. Later, he told us that the cave was large enough and to comfortably fit a person inside, and that, more disturbingly, he saw some red fabric inside as well. Before he can get a good look around, Kyle calls all three of us back over to him with a sense of urgency. He speaks very quietly to us and indicates that we shouldn't shout back. "Shampoo. Fucking shampoo," he whispers, pointing urgently down at his feet. Sure enough, in the mud and the leaves, there's a blue bottle of Suave shampoo right next to the creek. At this point, we're all adequately freaked out and ready to call our little soiree quits. Bill remains pretty sure that this is just junk left behind by the people up at the house after a weekend of a few too many bush lights. But things just didn't add up to me. There's one detail that I've been leaving out up to this point. The day before, this part of Iowa got some heavy rain, which contributed to the mud situation on the road and on the trail. With the combination of wind and rain, the items on the rocks would have shown some signs of being wet, if not been displaced entirely. Also, the air was pretty cold, as it is every year around this time, not getting above the mid-40s for the whole week. Then, everything starts to click for me. Whoever drank the beer and left the shampoo, hat, glove, deodorant, and shampoo down there must have done something this morning. The fire pit also had fresh char marks on the rocks, and the wood had not been wet for a while, meaning that it must have been lit last night at the earliest. The small cave would have provided enough shelter from the rain to stay dry. With the freezing temps and all throughout the day, whoever was using shampoo out here must have had little other choice to do so. If it was the homeowners, they would have had to be serious masochists to bathe in the shallow, freezing, rocky creek, rather than at home. If it wasn't them, then we likely weren't alone right now. Whoever left these things out left in a hurry, and if they were here 4 hours ago, they would have been able to see us on the trail cliff long before we even knew they were down here. Remembering the arrangement of rocks on the stream, they could have even been leaving their camp just as we were coming down the dirt trail. As I processed this, I started to look around at my surroundings and realized that the small area was bordered by the thick trees on the trail side, several sets of huge boulders on the pond side, and limestone cliffs everywhere else. Due to the tree, rock, and hill cover, you could light a fire in the pit at night, and nobody around would ever know. The illusion of being able to see up in the dirt trail from the camp, but not down, played in reverse from the cliffs. If you were wearing brown or green, you could easily see down from the rocks on top to the camp below, while blending in with the trees above. Coming to these realizations, I noticed something else. Something more sinister. The birds and small animals that we previously heard are now quiet. Aside from the soft babble of the creek, the entire place is completely silent. As I started to explain this to the rest of the group, I see the wheels turning in their heads as well. Jake starts to head back to the small cave when a rustling up on the limestone ridge line catches our attention. Something large was shifting around up there. Something that apparently didn't want Jake to see what was in the cave. We all look up, and whatever or whoever made the noise starts shuffling down the ridge toward the makeshift camp. Because of the high cliff, the only way down to us would be by going all the way back down to the pond and then double back up the stream. Realizing this, almost shitting ourselves at how open we were, we book it back up the stream, up the dirt path, across the field, and back to our cars. On the drive back to Edgewood, we all try to process what just happened back there. I take a look at the satellite map, and the only really accessible way to the cliff, where we heard the noise, would be to walk up there from the pond. It was too craggy to approach from the adjacent field to the east. Whatever made that noise would have had to be large too, and a deer getting up there wouldn't necessarily be out of the question. It would have had some incredible timing to have started moving just as Jake started looking at the cave and whatever red fabric was inside. Kyle found a report of an escaped convict from a local prison a few weeks ago and was convinced that it was his camp that we found. Though we were all doubtful, at best, of this idea, to satisfy his concerns, we agreed to report the strange things we found to the police anonymously, since we all wanted to really get home at this point. None of us followed up on them though, and I doubt anything came out of it. A small close-knit town police department gets a report of strange sightings from some stranger, and the same day 4 high schoolers roll up and park outside a farmer's house for a few hours, and then book it out. Doesn't exactly spell high-threat criminal activity to me. Still, things just don't seem to add up. Whoever came running down that cliff, if indeed it was a who, wanted to keep whatever was inside the cave hidden, but not enough to actually fight 4 decently tall and able teenagers. We figured he just wanted to scare us off, since the noises seemed to stop once we reached the dirt path. I thought it odd that someone living out in the woods, with something seemingly to hide, would set up shop in a state park. That is, until I checked my GPS again. That little reroute that it took us on was an old entrance to the park that had been cut off by the purchase of the lake area sometime between the map records used for Google's navigation being updated and that day. The current entrance to the park is about 2 miles north of where the GPS sent us, thinking it found a faster route. The place we were at was still public land for sure, but not quite what we pictured. So, dude in Mossy Glen Hollow, let's not meet. Hey guys, thanks for listening. Go ahead and drop a comment if you enjoyed the video, and go on and hit the notification bell to be notified when I next upload, and subscribe. It would really help me and my channel out. Thanks again, guys. I'll see you in the next one.